A sunny afternoon at a quiet gas station, just another pit stop for most people. Cars rolled in and out, folks refueled, grabbed snacks, and went about their day. But little did anyone know, something unforgettable was about to unfold. It started when a group of bikers pulled up, their roaring engines grabbing everyone's attention. Dressed in leather, tattoos peeking out of their sleeves, they carried the kind of energy that made people stay out of their way. As they walked toward the gas station store, they spotted a lone woman at the pump, calmly filling up her truck. She looked ordinary at first glance: jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. But there was something different about her, something they couldn't quite put their finger on. Maybe it was the way she stood, or the quiet confidence she carried. Whatever it was, it didn't sit well with the bikers, and soon enough, they decided to have a little fun. At first it seemed harmless, snide remarks and loud laughter as they hovered near her. People inside the store noticed but kept their distance, unsure of how things might escalate. What they didn't know, and what the bikers were about to learn the hard way, was that this wasn't just any ordinary woman. Beneath that calm exterior was a veteran who had seen and handled far worse situations than this. She didn't flinch, didn't react to their taunts, but her silence only seemed to fuel that arrogance. One of them stepped closer, trying to test her limits. That's when everything changed. Without warning, she turned, locking eyes with the leader of the group, and in that moment, everyone around could feel the shift. What happened next left the entire gas station stunned, and the bikers. Well, they found out they had messed with the wrong woman. Stay tuned to see how it all went down. The air grew tense as the woman locked eyes with the biker. For a moment, there was complete silence. No engines rumbling, no chatter from the nearby store, just the weight of an unspoken challenge hanging in the air. The lead biker, clearly not used to being stared down, chuckled nervously, trying to play it off like a joke. But anyone watching closely could see he wasn't quite as confident as he wanted to seem. The woman stayed calm, her expression unreadable. She wasn't looking for trouble, but she wasn't about to back down either. What they didn't know was that this wasn't her first standoff. She had served in the military for years, deployments in tense environments, learning to keep her composure in situations far more dangerous than this one. Out here, in a quiet town at a simple gas station, she was still applying those same skills, reading the situation, staying cool under pressure, waiting for the right moment. Meanwhile, the other bikers stood by, watching closely, unsure of what their leader was going to do next. They weren't used to people standing up to them, especially not a woman alone. It didn't make sense to them. They figured she should have been intimidated, or at least walked away by now. But instead, she was right there, steady, her eyes unwavering, like she was daring them to make their next move. Someone inside the store peeked out through the window, sensing that things could go sideways any second. A few cars pulled out of the gas station, the drivers noticing the odd tension and deciding they didn't want to stick around to see how it ended. Still, the woman didn't move. It wasn't fear that kept her in place. It was principle. She knew bullies thrived on getting a reaction, and she wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. As the seconds ticked by, it became clear this wasn't going to be just another random encounter. Something bigger was unfolding, and no one could predict how it would end. Stay tuned, things are just getting started. The tension in the air was thick, and it didn't take long for one of the younger bikers to speak up, clearly trying to prove something to the rest of the group. "What's wrong, lady? Cat got your tongue," he sneered, smirking as he glanced at his friends for approval. A few of them chuckled, but the woman remained unfazed. She slowly capped her fuel tank, moving deliberately, like someone who had all the time in the world. Her calmness only made the bikers more restless. They thrived on intimidation, but something about her made that tactic fall flat. The older man walked closer, his hands in his pockets, appearing calm but aware. He wasn't confrontational, yet there was a quiet authority about him. "Looks like more than a chat from where I'm standing," he said, his voice steady but firm. The woman gave him a slight nod of acknowledgement, as if recognizing a kindred spirit, someone who knew how to handle situations like this without unnecessary chaos. The crowd stared, sensing that the dynamic was shifting again. The bikers, who had started out feeling bold and in control, now seemed unsure. The woman remained calm, but now she had silent backup. It wasn't just the older man. Others in the crowd were starting to step forward, not aggressively, but with a quiet show of solidarity. The leader of the bikers clenched his jaw, realizing that things weren't going his way. He hadn't expected the woman to stand her ground, and he definitely hadn't expected strangers to start siding with her. Still, his pride wouldn't let him walk away, not yet. He leaned closer to one of his crew, whispering something under his breath. Whatever it was, it didn't sound good. The stakes had just been raised. What started as a simple intimidation attempt was turning into something much bigger. And with tensions rising and more people getting involved, it was clear this situation was far from over. Stay tuned, things are about to take an unexpected turn. The leader of the bikers leaned back, clearly annoyed that the situation wasn't playing out the way he hoped. The crowd's quiet support of the woman, the older man's steady presence, it all threw him off balance. He had come here expecting to intimidate someone, to get a rise out of her and walk away feeling tough. But now things felt different. He wasn't in control anymore. Still, he wasn't ready to admit defeat. With a quick glance at his crew, he muttered, "Let's wrap this up," and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a pack of cigarettes. It was a move designed to reassert dominance, to make it seem like he was still calling the shots. He lit one slowly, blowing out a long stream of smoke, as if daring anyone to say something. The woman watched quietly, her expression unreadable. She had been in enough tense situations to know when things were about to turn, and this felt like one of those moments. Before anything else could happen, the older man spoke up again, his voice calm but firm. "You should probably move on. No one here's looking for trouble." His tone wasn't threatening, it was measured, the kind of tone that people listen to because it carries weight. A few of the bikers shuffled uncomfortably, clearly torn between following their leader and just walking away. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, just when it seemed like things might escalate further, the woman took a single step forward. She didn't say a word, she didn't have to. Her steady gaze and calm demeanor spoke volumes. It was a silent message. Asterisk, this ends here. You're done, asterisk. The leader hesitated, his bravado wavering. He glanced at the older man, then at the growing crowd. Finally, he flicked his cigarette to the ground, crushed it under his boot, and muttered something under his breath. "Come on," he said to his crew. "We're leaving." Reluctantly, the bikers followed him, their bravado drained as they mounted their bikes. Engines roared to life, but the noise no longer carried the same sense of power. One by one, they pulled away, disappearing down the road. As the sound of the bikes faded into the distance, the crowd began to disperse, some offering quiet nods of respect to the woman. The older man gave her a knowing smile. "Handled that well," he said. She simply nodded, grateful, but not needing the recognition. It wasn't about proving anything, it was about standing her ground. Just as she was about to get into her truck, she noticed something on the ground near the pump. It was a small patch, one that had slipped from the biker leader's jacket as he left. She picked it up and turned it over in her hand. The emblem was familiar, something from her military days. A twist she hadn't expected. Turns out he wasn't just some random guy looking for trouble. There was more to his story, but that was a mystery for another day. With a quiet sigh, she got into her truck, started the engine, and pulled away, leaving the gas station behind. But those who had witnessed the standoff wouldn't forget what they saw, how one woman, calm and collected, had stood her ground against a group of bikers and walked away without raising her voice or throwing a punch. Sometimes, real strength doesn't need to be loud, and sometimes it leaves behind more questions than answers. Stay tuned. This story isn't over yet. A truck pulled into the station, the driver noticing the scene unfolding but choosing not to interfere. The woman caught the glance of a couple standing by their car, who seemed unsure whether to step in or keep their distance. She gave them a small nod, a silent reassurance that she had things under control, for now. But things were getting more heated by the second. As the leader of the bikers took a step closer, the sunlight glinted off a small patch on the side of her baseball cap. It was barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for, but it was enough to tell a story. A small symbol of her service, a subtle nod to the time she spent in the military. One of the older bikers caught sight of it and hesitated. He tugged on the leader's arm, whispering something, but the man shrugged him off, clearly not ready to back down in front of his crew. "You think you're tough," the leader taunted, trying to provoke a reaction. Still, she said nothing. Instead, she gave him a long, steady look, one that made it clear she wasn't afraid. But what made it even more unsettling was that she didn't look angry either. She wasn't rattled, she was in control. Inside the store, the clerk picked up the phone, ready to call someone if things got worse. Passers-by began to gather, sensing that whatever was happening wasn't over yet. The woman knew it too. These weren't just a few rowdy bikers looking to joke around. They were trying to make a point, but they didn't realize they'd chosen the wrong person to mess with. The question wasn't if things would escalate, it was when. Stay tuned. This is where the real story begins. The leader of the bikers stepped even closer, now just a few feet away from the woman. His smirk had faded, replaced by something harder, determination, maybe frustration. He didn't understand why she wasn't backing down. Most people would have been scared by now, maybe tried to defuse the situation or simply walked away. But she stood there, steady as ever, like she was waiting for him to cross a line. Behind him, the other bikers exchanged uncertain glances. They weren't so sure anymore. This wasn't going the way they had expected. One of them shifted nervously, muttering, "Maybe we should just go, man." But the leader wasn't ready to back down. His pride was on the line, and in front of his crew, that meant everything. Meanwhile, the crowd around the gas station grew, people lingering at a safe distance, curious about what would happen next. Some whispered to each other, wondering if the police would show up or if someone would step in before things got out of hand. But no one moved. It was like everyone was frozen, caught in the tension of the moment, waiting for the inevitable. The woman glanced briefly around her, taking in the scene. She knew how situations like this could spiral. One wrong move, one spark, and things could escalate fast. She wasn't looking for a fight, but she also wasn't about to let them intimidate her. She had dealt with worse during her years of service, situations that required quick thinking and calm nerves. This was no different, at least in her mind. The leader's voice broke the silence. "You got a smart mouth, don't you?" he said, his tone low and taunting. He stepped forward again, but before he could say more, the woman shifted slightly, just enough to remind him that she was watching every move he made. The tension hit its peak, the kind where even a small action could tip the balance. Everyone watching held their breath, sensing that something big was about to happen. The bikers were ready to push things further, but what they didn't realize was they had already lost control of the situation. The woman wasn't just standing her ground, she was waiting. Waiting for the moment when she would turn the tables. Stay tuned. What happens next will leave you speechless. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get any tenser, a voice called out from the edge of the crowd. "Hey, is there a problem here?" All heads turned toward the source, revealing an older man stepping out of a nearby truck. He looked weathered but solid, like someone who'd seen his fair share of hard times. His eyes swept over the scene, landing briefly on the woman before settling on the group of bikers. The way he carried himself suggested he wasn't just any bystander. There was something about him that demanded attention without him even trying. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. Some of them had started to sense that this whole situation wasn't worth it anymore, but the leader wasn't backing down. "No problem," he said, his voice dripping with false confidence. "Just having a friendly chat." He shot a look at the woman, still hoping to intimidate her, but she didn't budge. As the woman drove down the road, the events at the gas station replayed in her mind. She wasn't one to dwell on confrontations. Her training had taught her to stay composed, deal with what's in front of her, and move on. But something about the patch she had picked up stayed with her. It was old, worn, but unmistakably tied to a unit she crossed paths with during her service. It raised a question she didn't have an answer to. Had the biker leader once walked a similar path to hers? Maybe, like many others, life had taken him down a different road. She thought back to how things had almost escalated. It could have ended differently, badly even, but it didn't. Not because of loud threats or force, but because she knew when to stand her ground and when to let silence speak louder than words. Sometimes strength isn't about throwing punches, it's about knowing you don't have to. The older man at the gas station came to mind too. She didn't know him, but his presence had helped shift the energy in that critical moment. People like him, calm, steady, willing to step up when things get tense, reminded her that not all battles are fought alone. Sometimes, just knowing someone has your back, even a stranger, is enough to keep things from boiling over. By the time she reached her destination, the tension from earlier had faded. She parked her truck, sat for a moment, and took a deep breath. Life had taught her that moments like these don't define you. They remind you who you are. You can't control every situation, but you can control how you respond to it. With one last glance at the patch in her hand, she tucked it into her pocket, knowing it might lead to another story someday. For now, though, this chapter was closed. Sometimes, the real victory is walking away with your head held high. Know you didn't let anyone shake who you are. And as she stepped out of her truck, she smiled slightly. Another day, another battle handled the right way. Stay strong, stay calm, and always stay true to yourself.